We'll keep all the debts on the books, and for the bad debts, we will tax the people to give to the banks to make sure that the rich people don't lose money, that only industry and only labor will lose money. Well, of course, what that does is deindustrialize the economy even more, because without consumption, markets are going to shrink. People are not going to invest. Companies won't invest. The stores will close. There will be for rent signs. Tax revenues to the cities will fall. They'll have to lay off their employees, and the economy will shrink and shrink and shrink. And that's what is in front of us. Now, the question is, why aren't economists talking about this obvious phenomenon of debt deflation, which is the distinguishing phenomenon of our time? They're doing just the opposite. They're saying just give more money to the banks and everything will be okay. And nobody's asking, why isn't this working?
I'm speaking with financial economist and historian Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, Debt Deflation in Europe and America. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. Well, could you explain debt deflation? It's a confusing term.
Okay, when people earn an income, the economics textbooks, they earn the income and they spend it on the goods and services they produce. So Henry Ford said the reason he's paying his workers $5 a day is so that they can buy Ford cars. But people spend their income not only on goods and services, they pay off their debts, first of all. The first thing out of a paycheck they have to do, and it may even be taken out of their paycheck, they have to pay the credit card debt, they have to pay the bank debt, they have to pay the mortgage. Now, the more debt they have to pay, the less they have to spend on goods and services. And if they don't buy goods and services, then businesses close down and the economy shrinks. So the real economy of production and consumption is shrinking, while the payments to the financial sector of debt go up and up and up. Because from the financial sector, when the banks get money, or the rich people who are the main financial investors get money, they don't buy goods and services. The banks lend out this money on yet new loans, or they send it abroad, or they speculate, but they don't buy goods and services. So debt deflation is when you divert spending away from buying goods and services to paying debts.
I see. And then that then deflates the economy, is what you're saying.
Yes, there's less and less of national income goes to spend on goods and services, and more is given to the financial sector.
The Federal Housing Authority is suing the major banks, Bank of America, Chase, Citibank, Deutsche Bank, and other big banks. What is the lawsuit about?
The fact that these banks all misrepresented the junk mortgages that they were doing. They would package mortgages and look to sell them to investors in America, to pension funds, to insurance companies, and to foreign banks, saying these are AAA mortgages. AAA is as good as the U.S. government. We know that these mortgages are good because here's the income that the borrowers have. Here are the appraisals of the buildings. Well, it turned out that the appraisals were faked and the income levels were faked. There were no documentation loans, and the biggest banks have turned out to be running a fraud. And Bill Black is the one who's written more than anyone else. He's a colleague of mine at the University of Missouri at Kansas City, and there's a website, by the way, if we're talking about debt deflation or the financial things, there's UMKC, University of Missouri at Kansas City, economic blog called New Economic Perspectives, and Bill Black and I and other writers write about how the financial sector here has been what he calls criminogenic. In other words, it's been criminalized, and bankers have really run control fraud. The banks have crooked real estate brokers, crooked real estate appraisers. Right down the line, almost everybody's been engaged in a gigantic fraud that has created this whole bubble. And whereas when a similar fraud happened in the 1980s with the Savings and Loan Associations, thousands of people went to jail. Nobody's gone to jail yet. Hardly anybody's been arrested. And yet they're on a much larger scale than Bernie Madoff. Well, the Justice Department says, well, we can't really prosecute for fraud because if we did, fraud, then the banks are already dependent on the U.S. government for bailouts, and we'd be paying money for ourselves. So they're not sending anybody to jail. Even Angelo Mozillo of Countrywide, which was sort of the toxic bank in all of this, that's now part of Bank of America, there's a question of whether it's really illegal in America to do financial fraud. In a sense, the United States has decriminalized financial fraud. Well, the Federal Housing Authority that brought the suit that you talked about has 3 years from the time that it took over Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the housing guarantee agencies, to bring fraud. And it said, look, the government guaranteed agencies has been buying from crooks. And Citibank is run by crooks. Chase Manhattan is run by crooks. The Bank of America is a financial gang. And we want the money back. They have to make restitution, or at least they have to pretend. Well, the banks then tried to stop all of this by having the Iowa Attorney General head a whole group of attorney generals to make a overall agreement with the banks, basically to forgive them. And the Iowa Attorney General is trying to say they've stolen $13 trillion. Let's fine them $100. And the Obama administration was backing that. Yes, don't pay anymore. But now the New York Attorney General, and I think the Nevada Attorney General, has said, wait a minute, these guys have falsified loan documents. They've written in false figures. These guys are crooks. Bank of America is like a mafia. These are absolute crooks, and we're going to go after them and fine them and get restitution. And that's why Bank of America stock is down 6% today. Because now they think, oh, my God, what if they actually enforce the law? Well, Obama's Attorney General Holder, his job is to make sure that the law is not enforced. His job is sort of like the crooked sheriff that works for the gangsters who run a small town, and just to make sure that the gangsters can get away with it. And this should be what the election is all about. Holder and Obama saying, don't prosecute the frauds. Instead, make them whole. Make sure they don't lose anything.
Talk about the University of Missouri-Kansas City economics blog, the new economic perspectives on MMT that you mentioned. What is modern monetary theory?
Basically, it's the realization that we're not on a gold standard anymore. That when banks make a loan, they create a credit on their computer keyboard. And that the government basically doesn't need to borrow from banks. It can simply spend the money and create the money to pull the economy out of recession. Some people call us post-Keynesians. Other people call us heterodox economists. But we're sort of the opposite of the Chicago School of Economics that are the pro-bankers, the sort of free market economists, meaning let the gangsters be part of the economy, crime and the economy is all part of the same game-seeking. We're sort of the old-time classical economists, but we see that modern money is something created essentially by banks, and that if the government runs a deficit, then it pumps money into the economy. But if the government runs a surplus, then it sucks money out of the economy and pushes the economy into depression. So that if we're going to spur recovery today, then we need employment, and the only way of getting employment when there's not private sector market demand is for the government to become the source of demand by running a deficit, just the opposite of what the Republicans and the Democrats are saying. But it's exactly what Herbert Hoover and Roosevelt said back in the 1930s. I mean, the Republicans and the Democrats in the 30s realized that the government had to spend more money to get the country out of recession. Today, both parties are the exact opposite. They're pushing austerity plans.
So if people want to read about modern monetary theory, where would they go on the Internet?
Either to the UMKC, University of Missouri-Kansas City, economics blog, or New Economic Perspectives. Most of my current articles are posted there, by the way.
What about currencies, specifically the dollar, the euro, and the renminbi or yuan?
The currency markets are in a turmoil because nobody knows how Europe is going to resolve the currency crisis. People basically are moving out of the euro and out of the dollar into gold. They're moving out of everything. All of the currency markets are being basically run by huge computer programs, and there's no particular way you can relate currency values to consumer prices or price indexes or labor or anything that the textbooks talk about. It's just all the flow of funds.
Now, if the debts were canceled, how would that be done? How could that be done?
Well, the original plan for the bad mortgage debt was you reset the mortgages to match the current price of the property. That's one thing. Or you say, we're going to bring mortgages back in line with the rents. And let's say if this house or this apartment or condo were rented out, what would it rent for? Well, let's say we'll capitalize this at, say, 5% interest, and we'll capitalize the rent and get a reasonable economic price for the property, and we'll reset the mortgage at that price. That's one way to do it.
So then the banks would be writing off a lot of the debt.
Yes, and somebody would have to lose, and it would have to be the big bank depositors, because the Federal Deposit and Insurance Corporation insures depositors up to $100,000 or $200,000, I think, per deposit even. So the big rollers would lose, and they've increased the wealthiest 1% of Americans in 1979 had 39% of the interest, dividends, rent, and capital gains. Now they have about 2/3. They'd have to go back to their historical proportions, and the economy would become much less polarized between rich people and the rest of the economy. So you'd have a much more normal economy by writing down this financial fat or parasitism. You'd get rid of it.
Michael Hudson, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Bonnie.
There's something happening here. Yeah. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there.
I've been speaking with Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show has been Debt Deflation in Europe and America. Dr. Hudson is a financial economist and historian. He is president of the Institute for the Study of Long-Term Economic Trend, a Wall Street financial analyst, and distinguished research professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. His 1972 book, Super Imperialism, The Economic Strategy of American Empire, is a critique of how the United States exploited foreign economies through the IMF and World Bank. He is also author of Trade Development and Foreign Debt and Global Fracture, The New International Economic Order, among many others. Dr. Hudson has been a consultant to foreign governments, including Canada,